All right. Imperial Chinese art. Let's get started here. What is it? Of course, Imperial Chinese art was art created during the reign of the Chinese Empire from roughly the early CE era up until 1912. The art itself focused on a multitude of mediums, although focus on said mediums shifted over time depending on what was really hot at the time. It's also important to note that the art, like many others, heavily focused on the culture of the people that made it. Specifically, more or less, Imperial China, of course, but it also focused on new incoming cultural fads like Buddhism and Chinese mythology itself, as pictured here. Kind of fascinating how they just kind of carved that into a cliffside, but where was it used? Being Imperial China, it fell largely within the expansive reach of the Chinese Empire at the time, up until 1912, of course. So, because considering its borders, of course, it could be found as far as Russia, but thanks to its investment in the Silk Road and other trade routes, it is found as far as, Western Europe and such, especially considering the advent of transportation later in the 1800s. The style itself also developed over time in tandem with the changes of the empire, especially present in the consistently changing political and cultural landscape of Imperial China at the time. As demonstrated by this map, China's borders never really stayed the same. Yeah, it just kind of went all over the place. All right, when was it used? It's important to note China is never China per se consistently. It's always changing because, different dynasties and consistent conflict really does that to your borders. So our first dynasty is the Qin dynasty, the period marked by the effort to standardize artistic and cultural styles of Imperial China, which was due to help establish a unified empire. Because prior to the Qin dynasty, China existed largely as a system of autonomous states. Here we have the Terracotta Army, a very impressive feat of artistic display considering we're not exactly too sure what or how they did it. Next up is the Han Dynasty, a period marked by advancements in style and technique, although beyond that there's not much to it. There's also the time that, a production of bronze art pieces to establish landscapes of art. Next we move to the Sui Dynasty, largely recognized for the adoption of Buddhist art styles into this. Although this piece specifically doesn't exactly have a lot of Buddhist stylings to it, there are other pieces later on that do. Then we have the Tang Dynasty, more foreign influences of a Greco-Buddhist style from Asia. The Song Dynasty, largely noted for its increase in landscape and a larger focus on landscape pieces entirely. The Yuan Dynasty, again, a lot of these dynasties, it's a continued development of practice, style, technique, and other mediums. Although it's also important to note that a lot of these pieces at the time were very crude and stylized as a means of resistance against the currently ruling Mongol Empire at the time. They weren't exactly popular. Then we have the Ming Dynasty, a period characterized through a cultural revival in Chinese arts following the fall of the Yuan Dynasty, considering the fall of the Mongol Empire following shortly afterwards. This is also where we see more specific schools of Chinese art develop, such as the Wu School of Suzhou, and the style emphasized more colors and busier compositions. And then the last one prior to 1912 and the fall of the Chinese Empire itself would be the Qing Dynasty. Again, just a refinement in artistic practice and a continued development of style. All right, trivia time. Who wants candy? So, Buddhism is an incredibly influential source, if you would, in Chinese art. And considering the heavy implications it has in Chinese art, it's important to understand the culture and very layered system Buddhism presents. So, one of these additions that cultures add and take away whenever they introduce Buddhism is the idea of someone who can reach enlightenment, a nirvana, if you would, but decides to temporarily delay this for the purpose of helping others reach it as well. So, what is the name of this individual in the Buddhist religion? It's either a Netero, a Buddha, a Budai, or a Bodhisattva. Nope. Yes, a Bodhisattva, as pictured here. Very rough-looking image. Famous practitioners. So, our first practitioner is Wang Shimin, a Chinese artist who lived during the time of the Ming and Qing dynasties, a famous practitioner of the more orthodox styles at the time. And what made him renowned is he is one of the 6 masters and 4 Wangs. Here's a piece by him. And then we go on to Wang Jian, another Chinese artist who lived during the Ming and Qing dynasties, a practitioner of orthodox methods as well, and largely drew on the color styles of Dong Huan. Because of his mastery of orthodox styles, he was also named one of the 6 masters. Then we move on to Wang Qi, Chinese artist who lived during the Ming and Qing dynasties. He was a practitioner of orthodox methods and most renowned as one of the 4 Wangs and the 6 masters. And he's also very well renowned for his trying to preserve ancient Chinese styles at the time. And then our final one is Wang Yongqi, a master of Chinese artist who again lived during the Ming and Qing dynasties and a practitioner of orthodox methods. Again, he's a curator of imperial collections at the time, and he's largely influenced by Huanggong Wang and would later be named one of the 6 masters. It's important to note, these 4 individuals I named here are also known as the 4 Wangs and members of the 6 masters. There were a large number of Chinese artists before them and afterwards, but these guys stand out as the most influential considering their heavy dedication to the orthodox styles and incorporations of masters before them. A spotlight on Buddhism. So, Buddhism served as a very major source of influence for Chinese art pretty much throughout the entirety of imperial Chinese art development as well, considering it started out early in the early centuries of the Common Era, but lasted up until at least the end of the Chinese Empire itself, up until its current development. It's also at this point that when Buddhism was influenced, we see a stark change in style from very crude, simple landscape pieces to more extravagant, very eccentric pieces. It's presented here, although this is from Thailand, which very gray area. It's also important to note that Buddhism also demonstrates the ties China had with its very influential trade networks, considering Buddhism traveled along these trade networks and influenced China in that way. And China and a number of Asian countries as well, such as Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, etc. And then again, it was reintroduced with a Greco-Buddhist revival later on. Here we have the Praputa Mahasawana Patikaman of Thailand, a Buddhist piece. Then we have the Gishin Guanyin of Thousand Hands and Eyes of China. And then we have Kotoko-in in Japan. Again, a very influential style throughout Asia. The historical significance of imperial Chinese art is that it represents and allows us to view China prior to its current standards. Again, China is not exactly a very open book about its history. So this serves as a very interesting way for us to view it. Considering ancient history is hard to track sometimes, art does allow us the best way to view and understand these people at these times. And again, Chinese art was able to create pieces that still stand to the modern day, such as the Great Wall itself. And over time, we can also see through Chinese art how imperial China changed both culturally, geographically, and etc. through the various styles that Chinese art introduced. Of course, we have some examples here. This is the Hidden Palace, very popular Chinese destination. Then we have a piece from the very popular Chinese story, A Journey to the West. And if I'm not mistaken, that guy on the far right at the bottom is Nostradamus, weirdly enough. Again, towards the end of the Qing dynasty, they took on a lot of European influence. And there's our resources. Anyone got any questions? For the Ming dynasty, it could be argued it was one of the largest, but it was also one of the longest lasting. Definitely had an impact in Chinese art overall, considering its consistency and how rare it was to have a longer lasting empire than a couple 100 years. Any other questions? All right.